Justin, could I call you up? Justin Pidot on the faculty here at DU Law, as well as the rest of us. A great friend was lost in the gates of Lodore. Fred Cheever, rafting with his family last June, and it was sudden and shocking, but he loved the West. He had worked on the Endangered Species Recovery Plan for the Upper Basin fish in concert with developing the water rights that you've heard about, native and non-native. And we have a project going forward, do we not, to honor Fred? Would you describe that?
Yes. Thanks very much, Greg. And nice to see all of you here today. So I've been asked to talk a few minutes about a new writing award that we will be hosting here at the University of Denver, and also about the award's namesake, Fred Cheever, who Greg mentioned. And as I'm sure you know, we lost last summer. I'm going to read my remarks a little more tightly than I usually do to maintain my poise. So the easy part is the award itself. It's a great project, really derived from the energy and ideas of law students here. And it will be titled the Professor Fred Cheever Environmental and Natural Resources Writing Award. It will be bestowed for the first time next year on a DU law student for scholarly writing about the subjects that drove Fred's work over the years. Environment, natural resources, water law, sort of a broad set of issues. And depending on the topic, the selected paper will be published either in the Water Law Review or the Denver Law Review. Excuse me. And the recipient will receive both a cash prize and a full scholarship to the Public Interest Environmental Law Conference in Eugene, Oregon, which is a terrific conference. Now this award, in my mind, is really a very fitting tribute to Fred. He was a man who has a searing intellect, a voracious reader, a distinguished public intellectual, a masterful writer, a passionate advocate for the disempowered, whether they were people, places, or the creatures that share our world. But perhaps above all, Fred was devoted to his family, his friends, and his students. Fred's life was a testament to that devotion. In thinking about these remarks, I found myself rereading some of Fred's written work. What better way, I hoped, to inaugurate a writing award in Fred's memory than by reference to his own body of work. And in doing so, I was drawn to three of Fred's virtues that I think shine through in his writing, but also animate this award. Those are his commitment to education, his belief in the transformative power of conversation, and his love of the written word itself. And so I thought I'd share a few thoughts about each of those sort of themes and draw upon some of Fred's writing in doing so. So first, Fred's dedication to education. Fred began teaching here at DU in 1993 and has touched countless law students over that 25-year span. He was a passionate teacher. He taught, and to me this is what inspired me most about his teaching, he taught with a curiosity that invited students to join him in the shared intellectual endeavor of learning. A few comments from recent student evaluations that I think get at this aspect of Fred's teaching. The first, any class from Professor Cheever is a joy. And not a lot of law classes are described as being joyous. Second, he is excited about the material, which feeds into my excitement. And finally, and sort of fitting today, he will be the one who everyone will never forget. Fred taught law with skill, but he also saw law itself as an educator, and sometimes as an inartful educator. This comes through in an influential article he wrote, arguing that the Endangered Species Act must become a vehicle for species recovery, not just for preventing species from going extinct. Now that shift in emphasis has some obvious benefits for the species themselves, better to be recovered than on the brink of extinction. But in Fred's words, perhaps more significant, the act has proved an inadequate educational tool. Rather than convincing the American people of the need to preserve biological diversity, the act has apparently convinced many that endangered species preservation is just another onerous form of federal regulation. Only by addressing this educational imperfection, Fred believed, could the Endangered Species Act lay the groundwork for a long-term, sustainable relationship between humans and our natural world. What better way to honor Fred's dedication to education than through an award that will encourage students to engage deeply with the subjects about which Fred cared so much. So second, let me talk about Fred's belief in conversation. He believed that conversing carries power, that convening people, particularly those with differing perspectives, can be transformative. I benefited from that conviction all the time. His door was always open for whatever half-baked idea I wanted to discuss. He listened carefully, he shared generously, and I felt both personally and intellectually elevated from our conversation. But he didn't just speak to me, a colleague who had an office down the hall, who shared many of his environmentalist commitments. He was a longtime board member for the Rocky Mountain Mineral Law Foundation, speaking frequently at events hosted by the foundation. Now, the foundation has a great diversity of perspectives amongst its members, but its core membership are lawyers who work in mining and oil and gas. Many people with Fred's environmentalist heart might shy away from such prolonged engagement with an audience from such a different perspective. But not Fred. He remained perpetually optimistic that practical solutions could be found through conversation and that our shared values dwarf our differences. He also believed if we can't find common ground on hard issues, then we are lost. Fred wrote about the power of conversation, perhaps most notably in his article Talking About Wilderness. But though we value wilderness, Fred wrote, we cannot easily articulate what it is. Wilderness is a quicksilver notion defying easy description, reflecting images of solitary wandering, fruitful introspection, and biological preservation. More than a century after we began to value it for itself, and 35 years after its emergence as a statutory institution, wilderness remains enigmatic. We have traced its roots through our culture and measured its biological significance. We have designed and implemented administrative processes to discover it and reject imposters. We developed scales for measuring its qualities, but its core remains elusive. We need to talk about wilderness far more than we have. The concept will bear examination. Understanding it cannot help but lead us to practical solutions to many public lands issues, and perhaps to a deeper understanding of who we are and what we need. A writing award necessarily involves conversation through the written word, but I also think that the scholarship to the Public Interest Environmental Law Conference honors Fred's belief that talking matters. It's a place where students can talk with academics, activists, and with each other, and from those conversations grow new ideas and new energies. Finally, let me talk about Fred's love for the written word. This, of course, fits most closely with an award about writing, and I think particularly so because this award, as I understand it, is broadly conceived. The written description explains that formats can range from traditional law review articles, term papers from classes, to philosophical prose. I think Fred would like that. Writing can be both a craft and an art, and Fred was a master of both. So I want to conclude by just sharing two other passages from his writing that I find to be particularly compelling and playful. The first is from an article Fred wrote about species reintroductions, and it comes from a section, the background section, which many of us skip over, describing evolving ecological understandings of nature. Fred writes, "I still remember the 16mm film from high school biology. It began by showing a sand beach somewhere on the shore of Lake Michigan. The narrator's calm, didactic voice presented the beach as a starting point in the process of succession. Cut. The beach has sprouted grass. Small creatures appear living among the grasses. A few minutes later, cut. Small pine trees establish themselves, bringing new creatures with them. A moment later, the pine trees are tall. The pine reproduction falters. Hardwood saplings, maple and oak are growing beneath the mature pines. Birds arrive in greater numbers. A few more minutes, and the hardwoods outlive the pine forest and create a climax forest. For a few moments, the camera pans over the closed forest canopy with its towering tree trunks, buzzing insects, and twittering birds. When the film ended, we were left with the strong impression that the climax forest would last forever. This image, although a good faith recollection, is a caricature of the old view of biological systems. Quick development through succession, followed by a more or less perpetual, mature balance of nature. This steady state, as the film narrator pointed out, would be disturbed only by occasional outside forces, such as forest fires, tornadoes, floods, or human interference. Newer biological thinking emphasizes that those less predictable forces, fires, tornadoes, floods, and even people, are as much a part of the system as the more predictable succession of trees and birds. Accordingly, the system is vast, covering entire landscapes, in a sense, the entire planet. And finally, another passage from the article about the recovery of species from its conclusion. But no matter how politically difficult, a recovery-oriented approach to species protection is a goal worth striving for. The promise of recovery planning as a tool for bringing species, and perhaps the Endangered Species Act itself, back from the edge of extinction is tremendously significant. The lessons to be drawn from it are more significant still. As the human population of the planet continues to grow and the effects of human society and the environment continue to escalate, we have reached a point at which merely limiting the damage we do to the biological fabric of the planet is no longer enough. We must plan for the long-term viability of the natural systems on which we depend, and where necessary, actively assist in their maintenance. A recovery-oriented approach to species preservation, carried out with imagination, vigorously and in good faith, will tell us a great deal about our ability to carry out such a measure. Red, you brought your imagination, vigor, and good faith to all that you did, and we are better for it. I hope that this award we can inspire those same qualities in the generation of environmental lawyers to come that will take up your mantle. With that, I thank you, and I believe it's time for lunch and a plenary speaker. So it's been my privilege to talk to you about the memory of Fred Cheever.